It's a Wednesday. I forgot the day. I'm just starting the podcast and I already forgot the day. Ay, ay, ay. It is a Wednesday edition of The Bullpen with Adam the Bull. Hopefully I won't forget my Twitter handle right there. There you go. Follow me on Twitter at Adam the Bull. And wait a second. Is there a... wait. Oh, that spaceship looks like a hat for me. I don't know what I'm doing here. Anyway, hello, everybody. It's a Wednesday bullpen. And, you know, it's the All-Star break. The All-Star game was yesterday. The American League pulls it out 3-2. Jose Ramirez has a couple of hits. Andres Jimenez makes a couple of good plays. Emmanuel Clase gets the save. How about that? They bring in Clase to shut the door. The last of, I don't know how many pitchers it was. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pitchers. And Clase strikes out the side. We didn't get the over on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show yesterday. It was over 11 and a half strikeouts. We didn't get that, but did win the other two bets. So I'll do a little on the All-Star game, but honestly, you know what? That's it. I'm done with the All-Star game. That's all I got to say. Clase was great. Jimenez in the field was fantastic. He did strike out in both of his at-bats. And as I mentioned, Jose Ramirez went 2 for 2 and scored the first of the 3 American League runs after the back-to-back homers. And that was it. Offense done for the rest of the day. The All-Star games generally are not worth talking about that much, so I'm going to leave it there. When I come, but on the show today, I am going to talk about all 3 teams in Cleveland. I've got a wild stat for you that if you don't happen to know it, I mean, some people may know this, but if you don't happen to know it, it's going to blow your mind. Because we've talked on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show about can all 3 teams win at the same time? And so it got me thinking, well, have they won at the same time? Have the 3 teams ever been to the playoffs in the same year? Have the 3 teams been over 500 in the same year? It's been a lot of years, over 50 years. Has it happened? Get to that coming up next. It's The Bullpen with Adam the Bull.
Podcast is not for the faint of heart.
And I do think it's time for the Browns to move on.
It's not for those who ride the fence.
He's proven nothing.
But if you're looking for someone who tells it like it is about Cleveland sports,
everybody does fandom their way.
You've come to the right place.
I don't think he's any good.
It's time for the Bullpen with Adam the Bull.
All right, there you go. It's the Bullpen with Adam the Bull. It is Wednesday. Make sure you're watching the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show every day. By the way, we are less than 800 subscribers from 11,000. You could watch, on our video, on our YouTube page, there's the Adam the Bull and the Bullpen channel. So if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the show, please subscribe. We set a lofty goal to reach 11,000 subscriptions by the end of July. The people that set the goal for us thought it was unlikely to be attained, and we are on the doorstep. We're about 750 subscriptions away with almost 2 weeks to go in the month. I think we're going to get there. I'd like to get there before the end of the week, so do what you can. If you haven't subscribed, and hit the little bell there so you get notifications whenever I do the podcast, whenever Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show is on live, or we're putting out videos, which are consistently putting out content there. We're going to have a exciting announcement about Browns games and our show coming up soon. The games are right around the corner. The regular season starts in, 50 days? I think 50 days is the first regular season game. So the preseason game starting in a couple of weeks, a lot to get to. So before we played the intro, I asked the question. I said I didn't ask the question, but I said, I got an interesting stat for you. And today, early this morning, I was like, we've referenced a few times on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, can all 3 teams win at the same time? And I was like, well, listen, it's All-Star break week, it's the slowest week in sports. There's nothing pressing. There's no breaking news in the last couple of days. Obviously, I will talk about the latest on Deshaun Watson, but is it really the latest or whatever? I'll get to that in a minute. But looking at all 3 teams, I said, okay, well, have they all gone to the playoffs at the same time? Have they all been over 500 at the same time? First, you got to figure out how you figure that out. Like, is it in a calendar year? Because, as we know, football and basketball cross the calendar line in their seasons. So for me, I kind of did it, and it really didn't matter either way because of the Cleveland teams. But it's still the same answer. I did it for the NBA. It was the year that the season ended. For the NFL, it was the year that the season started, since the majority of the seasons are in those years. So when you go back through it, if you look at the history of Cleveland sports, all three teams have never made the playoffs in the same year. Now, it was nothing that I really thought about, and maybe we've discussed it at some point. Maybe you knew that for sure. I wasn't sure. I don't know why I thought it happened once. And I think where I maybe thought it happened was 1994. 1994 was, one of the best years. If you look at the success of all three teams, it was the only year that all three teams should have made the playoffs. Now, why didn't all three make it? Well, there were no playoffs in baseball that year. That was the start of the great run by the now Guardians, at the time the Indians. And when you look at that season, they were well over 500 when the strike hit, and that was the end of the year. But ultimately they didn't make the playoffs because there were no playoffs, so I can't count it. I think we're all feel good that they would have made it, but it didn't happen. Obviously, the Cavs and Browns made the playoffs that year. So I looked at that and I said, okay, well, at least they were all over 500 that year. How many other times has that happened? Well, the answer is two. That's it. Only 3 times in the history of Cleveland, and I'm talking about Browns, Cavs, Indians/Guardians, not adding arena football, not adding the WNBA or the Monsters. The 3 major league teams that have been around for a long time. All right? The only 3 years that all 3 teams were over 500, 1976, 1994, which I mentioned, and, of course, 2007. But in those years, not all 3 teams made the playoffs. So, can it happen? Will it happen? And is now the best chance for it to happen? Okay, so in the calendar year 2022, the Cavs have made the playoffs. Now, I think what I need to clarify, though, is if the Cavs make the play-in, do we count that? I've always said the wild card counts, but I don't know if the play-in counts. It's called the play-in. Are you technically in the playoffs? So if we're counting that, then we say, okay, well, then you got a chance. Ultimately, I don't think the Guardians will make the playoffs this year. I think they can. I think they can win the division, but if I had to bet, I would bet they don't make it. I don't think they're going to win a wild card. I think it's the division or bust. And can the Browns make the playoffs this year? Well, they can, but it's not going to be easy, especially if Deshaun Watson is going to be suspended, which, of course, we're still waiting on, and which I'll get to more a little bit later. But I think this is the best chance in a very long time for all 3 to make it. And again, letter of the law, I don't know how I feel. I do feel like the Cavs made the playoffs. In my mind, they made it, so I'm going to count it. I guess that could be debated. I wonder if I didn't even look this. Does I looked up all the playoff appearances at baseballreference.com, basketballreference.com. And I'm curious if they list the Cavs as going to the playoffs this year. Let's see. They do not. So I guess technically if they didn't make the playoffs. I don't know. We'll have to double check that. But we need to know but I do think either way, at some point in the next 5, like this could be, we've had great runs, right? You had the 2 runs with LeBron, with the Cavs. You had those obviously really good teams with Darty and Price and those guys that battled with Jordan and had some really good, opportunities, really good teams. Of course, we know the Browns have not made the playoffs very often, especially since 99. But, they had a lot of good years in the 80s. The Indians were terrible in the 80s. I think they were over 586, if I remember correctly, but they spent most of the 80s under 500. And by the time they got good in the mid-90s, the Browns were already bad. And, there have been plenty of years, including, of course, 2016, where the Cavs and the Indians were really good. But the Browns have, for most of the last 25 years, it's been the Browns that have screwed that up. Before, and before that, and then you had a stretch where all three teams were, had their moments. Certainly in the obviously in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, the Indians were great. But then before that, the Indians were terrible forever. I mean, they didn't go to the playoffs forever until they finally, went in 95. So that's why it was, even though they've been the most successful franchise, I would say, here in Cleveland since 94 overall, even though the Cavs have won the only championship, I think the Guardians/Indians have been the best franchise over the last 30 years. But before that, they were terrible, and they never went to the playoffs for half a century. And so, but now we're at a time where we may look back at the end of this decade and say that this is the best combined stretch of Cleveland sports, because it's certainly the first time in a long time that you're feeling overly optimistic, or at least somewhat optimistic, about all three teams, right? Obviously, the Guardians over the last decade have been mostly good. The Cavs have been good when they had LeBron, but the Browns were never good when the Cavs had LeBron in this most recent run. And by the time the Browns had a good season a couple of years ago with Baker, the Cavs were a mess. And the Browns and the Guardians seem to be going in the wrong direction. And now all three teams, the needle's pointing up. And when's the last time that happened? This is the best Cavaliers roster without LeBron in over 20 years. The Guardians got work to do, but they have some good young talent in the majors. You look at the All-Star game last night. They had three guys. Obviously, Ramirez is a star. They got Jimenez in the Lindor trade. They got Clase for nothing. And the Corey Kluber deal with the Rangers. And Kluber did nothing for them, and he's okay now. But that was a steal. And they have one of, if not the best farm system in all of baseball. Now, all those young guys don't always pan out. But right now, the Guardians, the needle is definitely pointing up, and I expect them to be a very good team over the next, it might take some time. I think they'll probably be mediocre, probably around 500 this year, maybe around 500 next year. And then they're going to really take off, I think. Now, they got to spend money. You can't keep the payroll 50, 60 million. They've got to raise it. I am hopeful they will, over the next few years, at least get to 100 million. If they do that, if they raise this payroll to 100 million, between 100 and 120, by at the very latest the 24 season, but hopefully by the 23 season, then I'm very confident the Guardians are going to be an excellent team for the next bunch of years. Again, it may take a little longer than we want, but they're going to be really good here coming up. They're on the doorstep of it, and they're not bad now. It's not like the Royals and the Tigers, or even the White Sox, who went to be bad for years. And the Tigers' case has been a lot of years. White Sox have come up again, although they're struggling. They've been struggling at the first half of this season. The Royals haven't come back yet from their World Series. But the Guardians didn't even have to get terrible. They just got mediocre and have stocked the farm system from, it was kind of down a few years ago, and now they've built it back up. But guys got to pan out. So the Cavs, obviously the arrow's pointing up with the three great young players they have that we all love and we're excited about. I think we all know they need another piece to bring it all together, but you got to love where they are. You got to love where the Guardians are. And then the team that people are most excited about, the Cleveland Browns. Now, and Browns fans have a right to not want to be patient, especially after this blockbuster trade. It may take longer than we hoped, depending on how many games Deshaun Watson is suspended for. But I don't think, you look at where the Browns are. Most of their not only are they do they have a very talented roster, but almost all of their key players are young, or youngish. Their oldest player, like their best older player was Treader, and now he's gone. And hopefully Nick Harris could step in there. Obviously, Batonio's getting up there. I think he's 30, or he and Conklin are a little older. but they're not old. Those guys will be, especially Bitonio never gets hurt. Conklin, no, because he's been injured. Bitonio to me is at the top of his game. He's one of the best guards in football, if not the best guard, maybe, except for Quentin Nelson of Indy. He's right there. I think he's as good as anybody, and he's not that old. I think he just turned 30. Now I got to look it up because it's going to drive me nuts to see how old Bitonio is. But you look at most of their other guys, and Bitonio, he just turned 30 last October. Most of their other key guys are in their 20s, and really, Deshaun Watson's young. Myles Garrett's still very young. Nick Chubb, I know running backs go over the cliff quick. But obviously Kareem Hunt, you go on and on and on. Most of their key players are 5-6 years or less in the league. Clowney's a little older. There's a couple of guys, but a lot of the stars, the big money players on this team are 27 or younger. That's huge. So if it takes one more year or 2 more years, and I understand a lack of patience. Well, you've waited long enough. But the team's young enough to do it. So, arrow pointing up for the Browns, arrow pointing up for the Cavs, arrow pointing up for the Guardians. Will they all be over 500 sometime in the next couple of years? If the Guardians can finish over 500 this year, then it probably happens this year. Unless Deshaun Watson is suspended for the whole season, because the Cavs did make they I don't know if they technically made the playoffs, but they finished over 500. The Guardians have a shot. It's going to be close. I think if Deshaun Watson plays even 9 games, the Browns will finish over 500, very likely. So I think the over 500 could happen for the 4th time this year. But can we get all 3 teams in the playoffs in 2022? I don't think it's going to happen, especially because, well, maybe it can't because, again, according to Basketball Reference, they're not counting the Cavs making the playoffs and the play-in, which is probably fair because it's 10 teams, and that's kind of crazy. But it will happen in fact, I'll say that it happens in 2023. I think it's a very good chance 2023 all teams make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. Now, one of the keys to the Browns' success, of course, is Deshaun Watson. There's more I shouldn't say it's news. There's more speculation about Deshaun Watson, and I'll talk about that next in the bullpen with Adam the Bull. First, folks, from the people who invented Healthy and Tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given Coconut Brownie Chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right. The Coconut Brownie Chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of chocolate brownie goodness. You can't go wrong here. So get one today. Get 10 today. Get whatever you want. I got a great deal for you. Go to Built.com. That's BUILT.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. This is a great deal. But you got to go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED 15 and get 15% off your order with Built Bar. Okay. So, Deshaun Watson, every day it seems like Mike Florio's got another source giving him information. He was the guy for much of the summer, late spring, summer, who was saying, well, Deshaun Watson's going to be suspended for a year. It's going to be more, all this stuff. And lately, he's been talking quite differently. Yesterday, he had an article saying he heard from like 2 days ago, there was a report that the Players Union was going to sue the NFL if Deshaun Watson was suspended for a year or suspended indefinitely. And then Florio wrote a column yesterday saying he's heard from a source that that's probably not going to matter because the suspension's going to be between 2 and 8 games. Well, last night, more info from Florio. This is what he had to say, again, for Pro Football Talk. If the reasonably expected range of punishment for Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson does indeed fall in the range of 2 to 8 games, the team that employs him currently is expecting the higher end of things. Per a league source, the Browns are privately bracing for an 8-game suspension of Watson. That obviously doesn't mean anything as to the eventual outcome. It only means that the team has come to the subjective conclusion, one it would never admit publicly, that expects to not have Watson for 8 of the 17 games in 2022. The next question becomes whether they'd fully entrust the starting job to Jacoby Brissett for those 8 games or whether they'll try to acquire someone else. He says there's apparently some chatter about the possibility of the Browns adding Cam Newton in the event that Watson isn't available for the full season. Would Newton be an option for half of the season? Would he be the backup for Brissett or the starter? So that's what Florio has to say. Now, first of all, here's what I don't get from his article, that the Browns are bracing for an 8-game suspension. I mean, that doesn't – bracing, I don't understand that word. As if an 8-game suspension would be coming out of nowhere. Even when the Browns traded for him. Now, we could argue that they didn't think there was any chance there was going to be a year suspension. We've argued on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. We got to a big argument on Monday's show about whether the trade's a disaster if Deshaun Watson suspended for a year. We could debate whether or not the Browns thought there was any chance he was going to be suspended for a year and whether they deserve criticism if he eventually is. However, there's no way that the Browns couldn't have thought that 8 games was a reasonable possibility when they traded for him. Maybe they thought that was the max, but I mean, I think a lot of people, myself, 8's been my number the entire time. The whole time they've had him. Every time somebody has asked me on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, on here, on Twitter, on interviews that times I've been interviewed on other radio stations across the country, they always ask, how many games do you think he's going to be suspended? I don't know, of course. Nobody knows for sure. But my best guess, and I think it's an educated guess, I don't know, maybe it's a semi-educated guess, has been 8 consistently. I now think there's a reasonable chance it'll be less than that, but like the idea that the Browns are bracing for an 8-game suspension, there's no way at this point, I think even at the time, but there's no way at this point that they would need to brace for an 8-game suspension. In fact, if I'm the Browns and it ends up being an 8-game suspension, I'm kind of looking at that as a win. Any less than that, if it's 6 or less, it's a massive win from what this could have been, the way the talk was. So now, the other thing he mentions to me is more interesting. That's Cam Newton. We've talked about Cam Newton on the podcast. We talked about it a little bit on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. At one point, I think last week or the week before, I brought up the possibility of signing Cam Newton. The more I think about it after kind of looking over what he's been, and I don't think Cam Newton's the answer. It doesn't seem like they're going to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will. He's probably the best option. But I think if Deshaun Watson if he's suspended 8 games or less, I just don't think they're going to go down that road, add more payroll and give up more assets. They've already traded a lot of assets. I just don't think they're going to do that for Garoppolo. Obviously they'll go into the free agent market. The question is, do you sign a guy like Cam Newton, who I guess in theory has the most? I mean, if there's any upside left in Cam Newton, he would have the most, I guess, compared to a guy like Mike Glennon or A.J. McCarron, who are really, not. I don't even think those guys are not even as good as Jacoby Brissett. Cam Newton was a great quarterback, but it's been 3-4 years since he was a great quarterback. He's looked terrible the last few years when he's been on the field. So I don't know. I mean, I think at this point, unless you're trading for Jimmy Garoppolo, I think Jacoby Brissett's got to be your starter for the first 8 games. Now, if Deshaun Watson suspended for a season, then it would make sense to trade for Garoppolo, but I just don't think that's going to happen. I've never thought that was going to happen. I still, even with Watson suspended 8 games, I would still consider trading for Garoppolo. But if they don't do that, which I don't think they will, I think the best option is to start Jacoby Brissett. I think at this point he's just as good, if not better, than Cam Newton. He's probably better. And in fact, I think he'd be less likely. He knows, Jacoby Brissett knows who he is on the field. And I don't know, Cam Newton probably still thinks he's that guy, that MVP, and he's not. Whereas Jacoby Brissett, he knows what he's got to do. He's got to be smart with the football, not turn the ball over, and hand the freaking ball to Chubb and Hunt, and make a couple of plays here and there. You can ask him to do something. I'm not to stand there and never throw a pass. But I think Cam Newton is going to make more mistakes because he's going to try he still thinks he's a superstar. We complain, we've complained, or I've complained, and others have, about Baker. Like, Baker thinks he's better than he is. Cam Newton was better than he is, and he probably still thinks he can be, but it doesn't seem like he can. Where Jacoby Brissett has been in this league as a backup, part-time starter long enough that he understands. I think my sense is he understands his limitations. He understands who he is. He's comfortable in his own skin. He's comfortable in his role, and I don't think he'll try to go out of that, and that's what the Browns need. And so I think, ultimately, I would advocate for trading for Jimmy Garoppolo if the suspension's 8 games. If it's 4 or less, then you obviously stick with Brissett. But if they're going to not trade for Garoppolo, then to me, if it's 8 games or less, you start Brissett, you bring in Mike Lennon or A.J. McCarron or some other guy who's played in the league a little bit. Just in case. You got Josh Dobbs, but he really hasn't played. And so you'd rather have him as your third quarterback. And you bring in another veteran to hold the clipboard and, whatever. But we wait. I know we all want the answer to what's going to happen. Will it happen before training camp starts at the end of next week? I can't tell you. Everybody seems to think it's going to happen at any time, but the only timeline that matters is Judge Sue Robinson's timeline. The rest of it is irrelevant. Quick break and some final thoughts to wrap up this edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull. Coming up next, right here. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the number one online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They've got you covered. Head to BetOnline today. Love it. It's great. You will love it. Or use your mobile device to learn more about the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right. Got to take my water break here. Okay. So some final thoughts here on the podcast as we head down the stretch to the start. And the NFL season can't come quick enough, and I can't wait for even baseball to get back because I hate the All-Star break. It's the worst. By the way, I'm not a uniform guy. I don't really care about uniforms that much. I thought the All-Star game uniforms were terrible. I'd love for you to tweet at me and tell me what you think. Am I wrong here? Am I crazy? I don't know, but I hated the uniforms. I felt like I was watching the game in black and white. It was awful. That's number one. Number two, I'm feeling old. We saw, if you're a big baseball fan, we've seen Matt Holliday's son was drafted in the first round of the baseball draft. So was Carl Crawford's son. So was Andrew Jones' son. So was Mark McGwire's son. And how about this? Speaking of the baseball draft, the Baltimore Orioles in the 13th round of the draft selected a pitcher by the name of Jared Beck from St. Leo University. Never heard of St. Leo University. Apparently it's a Division II school. Why am I bringing up this random 13th rounder? I don't know that he's related. Could he be related to Rod Beck, the former closer? I don't think so. But why am I bringing him up? If Jared Beck, who was drafted again by the Orioles in the 13th round of the draft yesterday, makes it to the majors, he will become the tallest player ever in Major League Baseball. How tall is he? He is 7 feet tall. Now, that is bizarre. Like Randy Johnson, extremely tall. We've seen some really tall guys, but we have never seen a 7-footer in the majors. There's been 7-foot guys in the minors. 2 minor leaguers. Oh, wait, Beck is 7'1"? Wow. No, I guess he's 7 feet. Okay. There have been Dutch pitcher Loke Van Mil. I've heard of this guy. Played 10 seasons in the minors. I guess he was 7'1". Ryan Doherty. Don't know him. But the tallest player to make the majors, John Roush, was a relief pitcher, and Sean Hageli. I don't even remember how to pronounce his name. He wasn't in the big leagues very long. They were both 6'11". John Roush was a decent reliever for a couple of years. But this guy would be the first 7-footer ever in the majors. There's a lot of other. Eric Karros' son was also drafted. Let's see. Marquise Grissom's son was drafted. Let's see. Pitching prospects both are. And there's a kid, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Jurangelo Singente, was drafted by the Brewers. He's ambidextrous. So, anyway, just a couple of fun notes. They tried, I give baseball credit for this. They tried to make the baseball draft more exciting by having fans there and stuff, but it's just, there's nothing you can do. The NFL, like everything else, except for all-star games, dominates. And that's not going to change. All right, remember, as always, please follow me on Twitter, Adam the Bull. Subscribe to the podcast through the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, and thus subscribing to the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show on YouTube. We got a big goal of 11,000 subscribers by the end of the month. We are about 750 away. I think we'll get there by the end of the month. I think we can get there by the end of the week, so do your part, please. We want you in the mix. Also, check out the Locked On Browns podcast with my man G. Bush, also Jeff Lloyd. And if you're looking to make a video, if you're looking to have someone do a birthday greeting or a congratulations or rip one of your buddies for being terrible at fantasy football, check me out on Cameo. I've done 4 videos so far in the couple of weeks I've been on there, and I've had a ball doing them. That's going to do it for today's edition of The Bullpen with Adam the Bull. I'll talk to you again tomorrow right here in The Bullpen. See ya.